It's 1991 all over again with the Minnesota Twins dominating the Atlanta Braves at home. We'll talk about it on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is always cold, the Twins talk is always hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins opening their series against the Atlanta Braves with a 4-2 win on Monday. Here's how it happened. The Minnesota Twins had a big first inning for the second day in a row. Minnesota loads the bases with nobody out in the bottom of the first, thanks to a Luke Keeschel double and back-to-back walks to Byron Buxton and Ryan Jeffers. Then it's Josh Bell hitting a bloop ground rule double to drive in a pair of runs. 2 pitches later, and the Twins have 2 more runs, with Royce Lewis and Cody Clemens each getting first pitch base hits. The Twins go quiet from there, but the damage already done with a 4-0 lead. Bailey Ober cruises through the first 4 innings before running into some trouble in the 5th. That's when Austin Riley and Drake Baldwin each get hits to get into scoring position with only 1 out before Ronald Acuna Jr. drives in 2 with a single. That's the end of the line for Ober. Taylor Rogers comes in to extinguish the fire. From there, it was the Twins' new look bullpen dominating. Travis Adams tosses 2 scoreless innings, and Jeff Hoffman works in and out of trouble in the 8th. The Twins load the bases with no outs for the second time in the game during the bottom of the 8th, but this time no runs are pushed across, with Keeschel and Buxton each popping out weakly on the infield and Ryan Jeffers grounding out to second to end the inning. That's all right, though, because Yoandres Gomez works around a leadoff walk to close the door and give the Twins a 4-2 win. Minnesota is in third place in the AL Central at 61 and 65. The Twins are 5 games back of first place Chicago and a half game behind Baltimore, Texas, and Detroit, who are all tied for the final AL wildcard spot. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. We are part of the Great Duck Sports Network. You can follow us on Twitter and YouTube. Give us a like, subscribe, comment, do all of that. We are at Great Duck Sports on both of those platforms and at grey.duck.sports on TikTok. There you'll find our complete video podcasts, as well as clips from each podcast and other videos that we're doing throughout the calendar year. Again, that is at Grey Duck Sports on YouTube and Twitter, and at grey.duck.sports on TikTok. The clutch hitting seems to be back for your Minnesota Twins, as they have an excellent game early on, at least, much like they did against the Philadelphia Phillies in the finale of that series. However, this time things take a turn towards the positive for Minnesota, where the Twins are able to load the bases with nobody out in the first, just like they had loaded the bases with 2 guys out in the first inning against Philadelphia. In that inning, it was Brooks Lee hitting a grand slam. In this inning, it was a hit parade against former Twin Martin Perez. It was a double by Josh Bell. And, we complain about, I think, rightfully so, some of the things that happen in baseball, which is just a part of the game overall, which are these weak hits where you'd expect the defense to get an out. But you're going to be the beneficiary of those plays just as often as you are on the wrong side of them throughout the course of a 162 game season. And now we've seen that in a microcosmic sort of way, with on Sunday, the Phillies getting their tying run on a bloop double that falls almost in the exact same spot that Josh Bell's bloop double does on Monday. And that leads to the Phillies winning that game. And this led to the Minnesota Twins having a big inning. That's typically a ball that, on that trajectory, maybe not hit to that exact location, but with that swing angle, that launch angle, all of the combined factors, more often than not, that's going to be a flyout. But now we've seen, because it's baseball, 2 days in a row where the defense isn't positioned, not necessarily, they're not positioned poorly, but they're not positioned for that particular sort of hit, and it lands in no man's land. That's part of the game. Twins are beneficiaries of it in this first inning. And then it is, because there had been two straight walks, and then the pitch to Bell that went for the ground rule double was a 3-1 pitch. Martin Perez's control was all over the place. He wanted to get back into the zone, and it played right into the next 2 hitters' hands, with Royce Lewis and Cody Clemens on the first pitch, knowing that Martin Perez wants to strike the zone, ambushing him right away in the plate appearance, and driving in a couple more runs. That is where the clutch hitting dried up. But you still, I think, have to love the aggressive approaches at the plate that this Twins team has had. And through all of the ups and downs of this offense, which is still at the top of the American League for total runs scored this year, for all of those ups and downs, we have had a constant of taking good at-bats and having the correct approach more often than not throughout the course of the season, throughout the lineups. The correct approach when the hits are coming in bunches, the correct approach when it's just a bunch of home runs. It is always waiting for your pitch and attacking when you know it's good to attack early in the count. This team seems to have a sixth sense for that. I think a guy who epitomized the exact opposite of that, even though he was an all-star for the Twins for the previous 3 years, and the approach being what was Minnesota's ultimate weakness, especially with runners on base and runners in scoring position, was Willie Castro, who took really bad at-bats all the time. And more often than not, it wouldn't matter that the process of those at-bats was bad because he was good enough to get on base enough to make it kind of a non-issue, at least for him, but it was something that was an issue up and down the lineup otherwise. And it's something in spurts that could be an issue for Willie Castro, for sure. But now I think the top thing that has happened with Derek Shelton and this new coaching staff is that the approach always seems to be consistent. The approach always seems to be good. The Twins still have one of the lowest chase rates in Major League Baseball. And we see right here that that's not because they're going to sit back and wait after the first pitch, which was, Joe Mauer's move, is typically not going to swing on the first pitch. They're not going to just straight out go into it with the approach that Mauer had, because that was an approach that works for Mauer because he could get the bat head to any part of the zone. If you get the pitch that you want on that first pitch, this Twins team is going to be aggressive. And in the first inning, that aggression paid off for him. You could say, however, that there was some sort of dichotomy with those approaches because they had that same sort of aggressive approach at the plate in the bottom of the 8th inning, where once again, they loaded the bases with nobody out. And in that instance, nobody came in to score. And that was because Luke Keeschall, Byron Buxton, and Ryan Jeffers had aggressive approaches at the plate. Now, they did not put the first ball in play, except for Ryan Jeffers, in those at-bats, but they were swinging right away in those at-bats. And the relievers for Atlanta took advantage of that by throwing breaking balls. One, because this was a different sort of situation that happened in the first inning. And I think that was perhaps the main reason why things didn't go the Twins' way in the bottom of the 8th, and they couldn't add on to that 4-2 lead, is because I think that was one of the rare moments where they didn't line up the approach to appropriately match the context of the at-bats that they were taking in the bottom of the 8th. In the first inning, we mentioned it, Martin Perez had just walked 2 straight guys, then went to a 3-ball count against Josh Bell. He was all over the place and needed to establish the zone if he wanted any hope of getting out of that first inning, especially with the bases loaded. And so he was going to throw, more often than not, predictably so, sinker balls right up on the plate. Probably wanted to get them a bit lower in the zone, but sometimes the execution just isn't there on a pitch-to-pitch basis. And that's okay a lot of the time, but when you've already loaded the bases, it's not okay because that means every single hit is leading to run after run after run. This situation in the bottom of the 8th, it wasn't that the reliever for Atlanta was needing to establish control. It was he is just needing to get out of this bases loaded jam by all measures possible. He hit Brooks Lee. He gave up a seeing eye single to Kalen Culpepper, and then it is a bunt by Alan Rodin that the first baseman is pulled off the bag. So he's attacking the zone. He's not having trouble finding the zone, save for early on in the plate appearance, hit pitch by Brooks Lee. He's not necessarily in the pitching mindset that he absolutely needs to attack the strike zone with the first pitch, with the bases loaded and nobody out. And I think we kind of fell victim to that aggression during that second stint with the bases loaded and nobody out, because Luke Keeschall swings early, gets behind in the count, pops it up. Byron Buxton swings early, gets behind in the count because they're not giving him the same pitches to hit that Royce Lewis and Cody Clemens were inevitably going to get in those first innings. And that aggression, in this case, did not pay off. But at that point, I feel like we're picking nits just a little bit, because overall the approach did work. And if it is just one time out of thousands that it seems this year that the Twins have mismatched their approach at the plate to the context of the situation, then we will take that 100 times out of 100, because it seemed like it was 10 times out of 15 players were coming up with the wrong approach at the plate throughout the 2025 and 2024 seasons, particularly in the epic collapse portion of those seasons. The clutch hitting outside of the first inning didn't translate to the whole game, not only in that 8th inning, but overall, the Twins got runners on a lot against Martin Perez and the rest of that Braves bullpen, but they went 3 for 12 with runners in scoring position. We've already talked about all 3 of those hits. They were all in the first inning, so 0-9 after that, and they left 11 total batters on base. So there was a big opportunity for Minnesota to blow this game open that they weren't able to take advantage of. And it could have proved costly, because Yoendris Gomez gets into the game, yes, and he walks the first hitter and then gives up at the end of the game a long fly ball that, on a day that has maybe 5 more miles per hour of wind blowing in a certain direction, goes over the fence and ties the game. But instead it's a warning track fly ball to Cody Clemens to end the game. And we're no worse for the wear after that. It was close to being a tie game in a game that really should have gotten out of hand much faster and much more quicker, especially in that first inning, and then even in the future innings where they were continuing to get runners on base and just not able to close the door. That is where you see a little bit of the hints of the 2025 team come into play. But again, I think the fundamental difference between the 2025 team not executing in those situations and the 2026 team more often than not executing well in those situations is that the approach at the plate of the 2026 team has been remarkably better, and that good process more often than not in larger sample sizes will lead to more runs and more success in those appearances. The good process should tend to lead to good results in the long run, but that doesn't mean every single game that you have a good process that those results are going to play in that particular game. That is over the course of a 162 game season. So I don't think the approach was wrong by the Twins at the plate, but it was just a game where the small sample size goes against you. And that happens because that is baseball. Well, let's go on and talk about Travis Adams. We've talked about the hitters, but a guy that I really want to highlight in this game is Travis Adams. And the Twins Twitter, I believe, put Travis Adams as their player of the game. And I would say rightfully so. Bailey Ober was having a really good game through the first 4 innings. Guys were getting on base, I think, in the first, second, and third. One guy got on base and he left a guy on base in each of those innings. But the 4th inning went 1-2-3 and did get into some trouble in the 4th. And maybe part of this was pitch count, because he had thrown a lot of strikes and Braves hitters had gotten a lot of foul balls off of him. He wasn't necessarily walking everybody, but he was putting it in a place in the zone where, at the very least, Braves hitters could stay alive. And that got his pitch count up to 94 at this point, after the Ronald Acuna Jr. single that drove in 2 runs and put him at first base. And if I'm going to condemn Derek Shelton for his mismanagement of Dean Kramer and of Connor Prelip during the Philly series, then I need to applaud when he listens. Not necessarily to me, although I'm sure he's a big fan of the Twinkie Town Tavern. Doesn't always listen, because again, we're still itching for those double-digit views. So if you are listening podcast form only, why don't you go ahead and at least give us a like and follow over on the YouTube as well. That will go a long way, no doubt. But off of that soapbox and onto another, Derek Shelton did a good job finding the right moment to pull Bailey Ober from this game, bring Taylor Rogers in, and get out of the jam with 1 out. But he still had to live with the consequences of his past sins, which was overextending the bullpen by pitching the top bullpen players in a meaningless game at the point that they had entered the game, an 8-1 game when Jeff Hoffman and AJ Minter and Andrew Morse were all in on Saturday, and then needing to use some of those guys again because you were in a close game on Sunday. And I said it on Monday morning show, is that you're going to deal with an issue if you are in a close game 1 of this series against the Atlanta Braves, because now you've used AJ Minter and Andrew Morris, 2 of your higher leverage relievers, in 2 straight games, one of which you really had no reason to use them. And so Shelton was behind on the bullpen and had to pay for it by using Travis Adams. And Travis Adams helped that decision pay off. Travis Adams got the job done. Travis Adams filled in the mistake that Derek Shelton had made. He covered up for it. So an excellent job out of the bullpen by Travis Adams, who last year had bad numbers. Through the first 2 months of this year, had bad numbers. We're talking astronomical ERAs. We're talking 7+ earned run average for a career by the time we get to the first week of July. A pitcher who was probably only safe on this roster because the Twins bullpen was dealing with so many guys coming in and out, being effective and ineffective. And when it became clear that the Twins were probably at the very least not going to be sellers, but could even be buyers at the trade deadline, it seemed like Travis Adams' time in the bullpen had an expiration date until that first week of July where he turns it on. And he's had some blow-up outings even since July 1st, but the overall numbers have been good, and the overall numbers have allowed him to keep an earned spot in this Minnesota Twins bullpen, even if it's just as the long reliever. Since July 1st, 3.93 ERA, and the peripheral numbers have been even better with a 2.92 fielding independent pitching. That means that the results are not properly projecting how good he typically has been, and you should expect him to be for the rest of the season. As long as he continues to pitch like he has since July 1st, we should see the rest of the way in ERA right around that 2.92 mark. And so that lowers his overall season ERA to something much more digestible. It's still in the 5s, I think, right now, but it could get to the low 4s or even the high 3s by the time the season is over, and that puts a much prettier shade onto his 2026 season and gives him a much better chance to A, make a postseason roster if the Twins get that far, and B, put himself in pole position for the long relief role coming into spring training next year. So Travis Adams saves the day, has been a part of a grander narrative of saving his own job at the major league level, and he also saves Derek Shelton's massive mistake from Saturday that now we can put behind us completely because no lasting effects should come from that. He was a vital part and should continue to be a vital part for this Minnesota Twins bullpen the rest of the way because of the thin rotation depth right now, where pretty soon Connor Prelip will not be starting games for us. And if the Twins don't have full trust in Kendry Rojas to go more than like 3-4 innings, which if his past starts are any indication of the Twins' trust in him, then it would be only 3 to 4 innings. Well, you're going to need a guy to piggyback off of that or be your opener, and that would be Travis Adams. Even if Kendry Rojas is put into the starting rotation and the leash is taken off of him, you are still dealing with a rotation that doesn't have much depth, especially until Joe Ryan comes back. And one bad start can ruin your bullpen that has become really a masterpiece at this point of the season. We'll talk about that in a second. So you need Travis Adams for those games to save the bullpen so that you are not, in the case of on Saturday, when you're down 8-1 because of a blow-up start by one of your starters, you have a good mop-up guy in there and aren't putting in AJ Minter, Andrew Morris, Jeff Hoffman, Cody Funderburk, all of your best relievers in a blowout game, just so that you can bridge it all the way to the end. Travis Adams allows you to have kind of a cheat code in that way. And he's been part of a grander narrative of this Twins season that has been focused on the complete turnaround of the bullpen, where it was clear as day when April 1st came around, or whenever it was opening day, that this Twins bullpen was going to be bad, and this Twins bullpen was going to be their weakness and probably the worst bullpen in Major League Baseball. But credit where credit is due to a front office that I chided yesterday and I'm going to chide later on in this show, but in this instance, credit to them where credit is due. They were not satisfied with a bullpen that included Eric Orsi, Luis Garcia, Justin Lawrence, with Taylor Rogers being your quintessential ace of that bullpen, him and Anthony Banda. And obviously Anthony Banda's season-ending injury hurt the bullpen depth even more. But you've got to give credit to this Twins front office and to LaTroy Hawkins, the bullpen coach, for continuing to rotate guys in and out, for keeping guys when they saw that there was promise there, even when I would have said there's not a lot of promise in Travis Adams. They saw that there was still something to work with despite the result numbers not being the best and even the peripheral numbers not being that good. They've developed Cody Funderburk. They've turned Cody Funderburk into a reliever who just doesn't give up runs anymore, it seems, and it doesn't matter the situation that he's called to pitch in. He just continues to put up zeros every time he's into the game. A team that was scouring the waiver wire in order to get to this point, to get your closer with Yoendris Gomez. That, yeah, there were a lot of misses, like Luis Garcia, like Justin Lawrence, but when you had those misses, there was no sunk cost fallacy where you were keeping these guys in the organization for weeks longer than they needed to be. They were kicked right on back out so that you could mitigate the weakness of your bullpen as much as possible. And then the trade deadline comes, and you're able to get Tommy Nance, and you're able to get AJ Minter, and you're able to get Jeff Hoffman, and you almost got Ryan Abreu if the Astros owner did not nix an Abreu for Trevor Larnach trade. That is a quick turnaround that you typically don't see throughout the course of one full season. A turnaround where you go from a bullpen that is filled with below replacement level players, as well as Taylor Rogers, who's probably right at replacement level at this point of his career, and Anthony Banda, who had a bad start. You go from that to now a bullpen that is one of the best in Major League Baseball. Since the trade deadline, since all of these new arms have familiarized themselves with the Minnesota Twins, and since we have had a full couple weeks of hot runs by both Funderburk and Travis Adams, this Twins bullpen is 8th in Major League Baseball in both ERA and fielding independent pitching, meaning that their peripheral numbers back up what we are seeing on the scoreboard and in the line score and on the Sunday morning paper, where you get the box score from Saturday night's game. If you still do that, you are seeing those results pay off. You are seeing the hard work of the Twins scouting department, of the Twins development department, LaTroy Hawkins especially, and the Twins front office as a whole in making sure that the bullpen wasn't going to be the reason that you lose games, and now has become a reason that you win some games and are able to steal some games that help you close out a lot of games that you otherwise might have not earlier on in the season. So big thumbs up, big pat on the back you give to the Twins front office, but let's keep that pat of the back or that hand clap to about 3 claps minimum, and it doesn't have to be uproarious, because we also have to talk about the poor decision that this front office has made, at least in the short term. And that is, yesterday, they have Austin Martin placed on the injured list after he injured himself coming into the game in left field in the finale against the Phillies on Sunday. He injures himself. They're putting him on the 10-day injured list. I didn't really get a good idea of what the severity of that injury was, but he's gone for now. And for me, I would think this is the perfect opportunity to call up one of those top outfield prospects, replace an outfielder with another outfielder. This is the moment you've been waiting for. I yesterday said that this was going to be a moment that, if anything else, it sucks for Austin Martin, but if anything else, we can at least try to look at some silver lining from a bird's eye view and say this will force the Twins' hand to bring up Walker Jenkins, or even if you didn't think Walker Jenkins was ready, Gabriel Gonzalez, who they've already called up at certain points, or any of the other prospects, Emma Rodriguez, Henry Mendez. Aaron Sabato, for all I care. And no, the team brings up Alex Jackson, who has just waived to clear a 40-man roster spot. He now retakes that 40-man roster spot and is now back with the big club. And you might be thinking, okay, and Aaron Gleeman thought this as well, and this is where I'm getting the information for this particular part of the show. Aaron Gleeman had researched that Alex Jackson has over 1,500 innings of experience in the outfield at a minor league level. And so he asks Derek Shelton, okay, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, or at least we'll give the Twins front office the benefit of the doubt. It's not necessarily Derek Shelton that made the decision to bring up Alex Jackson instead of somebody else. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they like what they've seen from Alex Jackson, who has been a good hitter in very limited sample size and very sparse playing opportunities, even when he's been on the active roster ever since Ryan Jeffers' injury back in May. He's been a good hitter, but he's been your third catcher, so you haven't really been able to use him. So maybe it is asking Derek Shelton, okay, so you guys are going to use him as an outfielder a little bit more? And Derek Shelton says, maybe in an emergency situation, but no, that's not the plan. So what is the plan? Why? I get if you want to, I can understand it. If you are going to give him reps in the outfield and he is going to have more playing time, essentially, in this next stint with the Twins than he did throughout the late stages of this past stint of the Twins, where he's playing like 5 games since the All-Star break, because he's the third catcher and the third first baseman, and you're not going to use him apparently at any other position. If you are going to use him in the outfield, and you think that the numbers that he's put up at the major league level play, and will continue to play, and will continue to be around those marks, which I would have doubts on in the first place. But if you said that, that would at least be understandable to me. It would make some logical sense. I wouldn't agree with it, but I would say that the logic is sound. What is not sound is still going to be refusing to play him as an outfielder, which I don't think that it would have been the best choice anyway, and keep him as the third catcher and third first baseman. So on days when either both Royce Lewis and Josh Bell are off, or days where either Ryan Jeffers and Victor Caratini are both off, those days that are few and far between at this point, because you don't want Royce Lewis out of the lineup no matter what. You don't want Josh Bell out of the lineup no matter what. You don't want Ryan Jeffers out of the lineup no matter what. Victor Caratini, sure, I'm fine with him not being in the lineup as much, and I'm fine if you want Alex Jackson to take some of those reps as the backup catcher. But then you have Victor Caratini taking up a third catcher spot, and he has some versatility to play first base, but again, he'd be the third first baseman. So even if you were like, okay, Alex Jackson is going to get more reps than Victor Caratini, and you still have the problem of having a third catcher that you're going to hardly utilize. You filled up this roster spot for an injured Austin Martin to basically give a guy a seat on the bench. You know, maybe he can moonlight as a bullpen catcher too. I don't understand, if you're not going to place him in the outfield, why he was the guy to be called up, which means there is either some miscommunication or misaligned sort of process between Jeremy Zoll and Derek Shelton, or this is overall just an atrocious decision by Jeremy Zoll to have Alex Jackson be the one to get called up for Austin Martin. And you could say, well, Josh, you are very wanting and desiring of prospects to come up as soon as possible. And I would say yes, but I would say even in this situation where you had to fill that 40-man spot again with Alex Jackson, the one that he had just cleared, when you bring Alex Jackson back up and have him fill that 40-man spot, you were saying, okay, there was that 40-man spot that was available for Walker Jenkins. Okay, we're not going to give it to him anyway. So Alex Jackson, in order for Walker Jenkins to get a spot, is going to have to be DFA'd again at some point. So why are we delaying the inevitable at that point? And even the guys that are on the 40-man roster already that could keep that 40-man roster spot open are guys like Emma Rodriguez, who's not hitting greatest, but he's 242, 407, 465. Guys like Gabriel Gonzalez, 247, 313, 408. Guys like Tristan Gray, who at least will bring you position versatility, even if he's not going to bring you a lot of pop with his bat. You will get use out of that roster spot, more use than you're going to get from Alex Jackson. Or if you just want the same sort of quad A player like Alex Jackson who is not on the 40-man roster, you can bring up Orlando Arcia again. And again, is going to bring you more position versatility and hit decently, better than expected, not above league average by any means, but hit decently during his stint with the Twins earlier on this season. So I just think giving Alex Jackson the call-up with no plans or designs to use him more than you were using him in the last month of the season is just completely asinine. You've got Walker Jenkins, you've got Gabriel Gonzalez, you've got a slew of prospects, and even if you didn't want to use them, you've got a slew of more versatile position players that can give you play in the outfield and the infield and are not complete whiffs at the plate necessarily. They're not great, but they're not complete whiffs. Alex Jackson brings you the bat, but if you're not going to have a time to get that bat in the lineup, there's really no point of him being up here on the team. So I would like to know what Jeremy Zoll's thoughts on all of that was, the thought process that he went through to decide. Maybe I'm missing some sort of logic, but it doesn't seem that way to me at this point. But if anyone has an idea of what other logic this could be to bring up Alex Jackson instead of literally anybody else, and specifically Alex Jackson without plans to use him as an outfielder, then please let me know in the comments below. That's all that I have for you from this first game of the Braves series. The Twins and Braves will continue their series tonight. The Twins go for the series win, and they will be facing an old friend for the second game in a row when Tyler Mahle starts for the Atlanta Braves. He is 4-9 with a 4.64 ERA and 105 strikeouts this year. Meanwhile, it will be Zebby Matthews going for your Minnesota Twins, 6-8 with a 5.34 ERA and 77 strikeouts. The Twins are just a half game out of a playoff spot. By this time tomorrow, they might have a playoff spot if things go their way against Atlanta and go their way in whoever is playing Detroit, Texas, and Baltimore. But all of that will remain to be seen. Based on what has happened this season, any direction that the Twins team goes, or any AL Central team goes, Kansas City Royals, they could probably still be in it. Anything would not surprise me at this point. And that's the last call on Twins Talk for today. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins!